And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. I guess the truest form of geek speak he was assigned to Tim Berners-Lee when in 1989 he stated, "I just had to take the hypertext idea and connect it to the TCP and DNS ideas, and ta-da, the World Wide Web." On today's Open Connection, we rejoin the conversation with economist Todd Hirsch as he looks back to the early days of the Internet.
How do I just type some things in and a website from Germany comes up? It took 12 minutes, by the way, for it to kind of, come up. But eventually it did, and it seemed like, wow, this is like space age. How does it work? And of course, we sort of missed the point. It's not how it works, it's how do I use this? Now, 30 years later, I don't think anyone in 1992, the advent of the internet, would have been able to foresee that by 2023, the total global economy hangs in the balance on this internet keeping working, right? I think artificial intelligence is kind of the same way. We're at early days, not for the scientists, they've been doing this for a while, but for the masses of us, we're in early days in understanding not how it works, but how do I use this? A great quote I heard from a friend of mine in Calgary, he posted this on Instagram or something. Patrick Lohr is his name. He said, "Artificial intelligence isn't going to take your job. The person who uses artificial intelligence is going to take your job." That sort of puts a different spin on it. And it maybe takes a little bit of the fear away, because it's not artificial intelligence as a tool that's going to replace somebody, but it's that worker or that company that knows how to use artificial intelligence to its advantage. They're the ones who are going to succeed. But I would also offer that artificial intelligence, maybe unlike the internet, unlike other innovations that have come along in the past, it is a little bit different, and it's a little bit sinister because it does have the capacity, again, I'm not the expert in this, but it has the capacity to learn and change as it goes along. And there's all these apocalyptic visions of, artificial intelligence wiping us all out, and there's no end to Hollywood movies. I mean, this is really great stuff for movie writers, right? And now a lot of us feel like, well, we're just on the cusp of this happening. Should we stop it? I would suggest there's no point in trying to stop it because it is going to happen. The best we can do is learn how to manage it and learn how to use it. But it is a driver of disruption. I don't have time to get into too many of these, but social media, we've seen how useful, but also really socially disruptive and destructive it has been. Corporate concentration, a lot of talk around that. Income disparity, which is creating some really interesting political dynamics, especially in the UK and the United States right now. Internal political turmoil. This is, again, everywhere. It's not just Canada. It's not just, the United States. But in the United States, I got a feel for our friends at the South. They are wound up in knots trying to figure out who's going to be the Speaker of the House. It's an important decision, but they are completely focused and wound up on this and fighting, and it's really political infighting. In the meantime, any hour they spend as elected officials, any hour they spend trying to figure that out is one less hour they have to sort of create good economic and sensible policies for their economy. It distracts away from that. And another granddaddy, another pandemic. I'm not even going to suggest that COVID-19 is going to return. It might. It might be some different pandemic altogether. That is not my forecast, but we have to preserve some space in our imagination that this could happen. We might have called it a black swan event when it happened in 2020, but something like that could happen again, and it could be disruptive. So, to wrap up, how can industries in the northwestern BC region prepare for these unpredictable, volatile, and complex drivers of disruption? So I've given you a lot of really kind of bad news, and I hope that you don't feel disappointed in inviting me, because now what I'm going to do is give us some tools that I hope will provide some optimism. These drivers, by and large, we can't really do too much about them, but we can respond to them. But we have to have the right tools. So here we're going to go back to 8th grade basketball, some of the lessons that we can learn from grade 8 phys ed. Number one, know who you are. Socrates taught us wisdom. To know yourself is the beginning of wisdom. Know who you are as a company. Know who you are as an economic region, as an indigenous nation, even as an individual. What's your story? Mission statements are a part of that, and lots of businesses have mission statements that they've crafted. That's a part of it. But who are you as a business? Where did you come from? Where are you now, and where are you going? Those are actually really important but difficult questions. In grade 8 phys ed, I knew my story. I don't think at 14 I would have been able to articulate it. But because I knew I was good at math, I had some identity around that. And that's why phys ed was not devastating when that hit me. It was disappointing, but it wasn't devastating because I knew my story.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Relationships can be broadly categorized into several types: family, friendships, romantic, sexual, work, and situational. These categories can sometimes overlap, and individuals may experience multiple types of relationships simultaneously. Let us rejoin the conversation with economist Todd Hirsch.
It's all about relationships. Again, I don't need to convince people in this room because you are spending voluntarily, I assume you're here voluntarily, maybe someone made you come, I don't know, but you're here to build relationships with other people. You're here to learn from other people. You're here to talk about your story, to find out what's going on, and collectively build something and move things forward in the terrace region. It's all about relationships. Tool number 3, be prepared for anything. As I said, sometimes, I was picked maybe 3rd round. I had to be prepared on that day to actually try my very hardest, to put out extra effort, not just to get the S on the report card, but the captain of the team expended some capital on me, and I had to really try my best. I still don't think I ever completed a layup, but I had to really try hard as not to disappoint the captain, who I had a relationship with. You have to be prepared for anything. As an economist, I've almost completely abandoned the idea of forecasting, and I spent 30 years of my life. That's really depressing now that I just say that. I've spent 30 years of my career as an economist fussing over econometric forecasts. What's the GDP going to do next year? And we fuss and agonize over it, trying to believe we can get to 1/10 of a percentage point. Is it going to be 3.1% growth or 3.2? I don't know. Let's hone the model a little more. It's all folly. Rather than spending so much effort forecasting, I think we're much better at spending time preparing for any outcome because we just don't know what is going to happen. And finally, and maybe most importantly, show up. Show up for your team members, show up for your bosses, show up for your boards of directors if you've got those. Show up for a community, which is what you're doing. Show up for yourself. The speaker bureau that I work with, I was chatting with her and I was saying, what are the big topics that conferences are looking for right now? She said, 100% the biggest topic, mental health and wellness. Because there is a realization that we have to show up for ourselves. If we aren't showing up for ourselves and taking care of ourselves, there's no way you can do it for someone else. As the airline flight attendant tells you, put your own mask on first before you assist others. Show up with kindness to yourself. My 9-year-old niece, she wanted to make me one of these Taylor Swift bracelets, so I feel quite cool about this. So she said, Uncle Todd, it has to... So I picked the colors, and she goes, Uncle Todd, it has to say something. Every bracelet has to say something. She wanted to put Taylor Swift on, but I chose Kindness Matters. And I maybe feel a little silly wearing it, but it reminds me every day that kindness matters, kindness to ourselves, showing up for ourselves, showing up for others in our community and our businesses. And if we do these things, we will be able to navigate the drivers of disruption. I've talked about a lot of really troubling things, but the hope is that we have the tools to navigate our way through this, and we will get through it together.
I didn't see this in your presentation. I'm not sure if you can comment on it. There was a book handed to me quite a number of years ago from a banker, And the title of the
Well,
book
that's bad news right off the bat.
I know. That's why I'm saying I'm not sure if you can answer this. The title of the book was The New Money System. And so I know I talk about the economy and of course, currency, of course, is tied into that. And so I read the book and I kind of followed up on some of that. And over time, I've noticed how Visa, MasterCard, and Mondex, which is a part of MasterCard in the UK, have been using and going through some universities and studying the use of how they will kind of transition from credit card to something that is not tangible. And so they've looked at, of course, there are 1 billion pets around the world that are tracked, and they are looking at ways to get rid of our currency. And the purpose of it is efficiency and the cost to print money is very expensive. And so we're starting to see in Canada, I think the number is quite high compared to other countries where more than 30% of Canadians don't carry cash, right? Yeah. There was an article, actually a report on in Australia. They're going to a cashless society, and it's a transition that has started. And there's a conversation. The technology is there to happen, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that. And because I think it's inevitable that we're going to see a cashless society, and you talk about globalization and how trade is happening between countries and the different currencies, and it's just it is there. The platform's there. Do you have any comment on where you see that going?
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Launched in February 1950, the Diners Club card was widely considered the first credit card. Frank McNamara was inspired by the idea when he forgot his wallet during a business dinner. 18 years later, Canada's first all-purpose credit card, ChargeX, later Visa, was launched. Let us return the conversation as Todd grapples with the idea of a cashless society.
I used to work at the Bank of Canada, actually, and I was surprised to learn, and that was 20 years ago, that only 4% of transactions in our economy involve cash. And that was 20 years ago. I'm sure the percentage is far less today. So we talk about, can we let go of cash? We already kind of have. I mean, for most things, we don't really use cash. Now, I don't want to suggest that also isn't without some risk, because we are now putting ourselves in a position. What if there is a massive cyber attack on Canada? We can't rule that out. That's not my prediction, but we can't rule out something like that. And what might that do to our cashless society and our economy? It would stop it in its tracks. But I do think it's one of those trends that, there's no point in trying to stop it. This is where everything is moving towards. I don't think we need to be that worried about it. I remember 2011, I think it was, the Canadian government got rid of the penny. And there was like, what? How are we going to live without? Well, did anyone even notice now that the penny was gone? And I think, as we move towards a cashless society, I think it'll be the same thing. Young people who won't be young 30 years from now, they'll look back and they'll say, cash, wasn't it dirty? What if you drop it and lose it? There are all these things about cash that actually aren't great. But that's a long way of saying that I think it is inevitable that it is going to happen. I just think learning how to manage that process, learning how to safeguard our financial system is going to be even more important.
Just looking back to what you said in the 20th century, we either applied monetary policy or fiscal policy to solve our economic problems. But with some of the things that you brought up, do you see a new economic framework coming about to help solve those problems?
Yeah, I do. And I don't know what it is yet, but yeah, in the 20th century, monetary policy, so adjusting interest rates and the supply of money and everything the Bank of Canada does, and fiscal policy, that's governments taxing and spending our money and trying to manage things. They're not going away, but they really were more effective tools in the 20th century. In the 21st century, we're already finding out these things aren't as effective anymore. The Bank of Canada is doing all it can to quell inflation, and it's not really working. Fiscal policy is driven by politics these days. Unfortunately, if we like it or not, it just is. and not necessarily what is the best decision, and government debt. We've kind of worked ourselves into this position where, as Canadians, let's be honest, we demand an awful lot, right? And the costs of these things, and it's not always just the fault of governments or healthcare systems that, people say they waste money, but we didn't have the kinds of cancer treatments that we do today. We didn't have those in 1950 and 1960 when the healthcare system was set up. But we've worked ourselves into this corner now, whereas Canadians, we want a lot of things, but don't you dare increase my taxes. And I'm not here to advocate for tax increases, but eventually the system is creaking and something is going to happen to it. What that looks like, I don't know. This is why I talk about the future economy. There's things about it that we can only sort of guess what it's going to look like. But I do think in the future, both traditional monetary policy, central banks, and traditional fiscal policy, taxing and spending, they're going to become, I don't want to say obsolete, but they're going to become less efficient at what they used to be able to do really well.
My name's Eric Clayton. I'm from the Nisga'a Nation, and I listened with quite interest. And I think one of the most important concepts that we have to think about when we talk about economy is human resource. And comes with human resource, you think about knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. In saying that, I think it's very imperative that our governments think about a new way of thinking of doing business. Stop selling our resources to foreign interests. For one, that's first and foremost, to improve on your economy. Try and keep your money within your own atmosphere around you, because it's more beneficial in terms of the economy if you're driving your own economy within your own area. And I think that's imperative that governments start to learn this and practice it, because the youth are our future, and that's where we should start, at that basketball court or that soccer court, soccer field or wherever. Because that's where you start to learn the basics of leadership.
Yeah.
And when you're learning how to do leadership at a young age, you start practicing good ethics and as you go along. My question is when you think about our debt, our national debt and our provincial debt, and you think about how all the taxes that we pay, carbon tax, we pay all kinds of taxes. There's a tax on everything, taxes on top of taxes. So if we're paying all these taxes, who do we owe all this money to?
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Attributed to Chief Seattle, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children, highlights the idea that we are stewards of the planet, not its owners. It emphasizes the responsibility we have to protect and preserve the environment for future generations. In this final segment of Open Connection, Todd ponders where the next generation is coming from.
Young people, how we teach them leadership, how we teach them kindness. I'm not a parent, but I look at kids and I wonder, where is the kindness? Is this something that we're losing as a society? I sure hope not. But I couldn't agree more with you on the point that, children are the future, as Whitney Houston saying, and learning to instill in them leadership and kindness and respect, I think is really important. The other topics, we don't have time to get into them. The only thing I would say, who do we owe all this money to? That is a question I get asked all the time. In a lot of cases, we owe it to ourselves. If any of you in this room, if you have a mutual fund, almost certainly you've got some Government of Canada bonds. You probably have some government bonds of provincial governments. So we've loaned the government's money, but other countries, investors in other countries have also bought that debt as well. It's a good investment for them. So we owe it to sometimes ourselves, sometimes to investors in other countries. And suffice to say that, I do worry about the level of debt. We're actually in a better spot than we were in the 90s. Debt levels came way down and they stayed quite low. And then COVID disrupted everything. And now we're in a period of time where governments, look at any provincial or federal government, no one is even talking about balancing a budget. Maybe you are here in BC, I don't know. The federal government, it's not even on their radar screen, for good or for not good. But we've lost sort of a focus on, do we need to balance budgets? And a lot of that is because there are just too many pressing demands. Because if you cut taxes and pay off debt, that means that's another hospital that doesn't get built, or another school that doesn't get built, or another hip that doesn't get replaced. All these things cost money, and voters know that they want these things. As voters, we tend
of issues that we constantly have to be mindful of, not just your projects or our projects. Economic development is one particular sector that we're seeing where we're able to shoot that gaps by supporting projects. But we have a whole array of different issues, and the chief councillors and the leaders in the room here with me today definitely know what I'm speaking about when I'm talking about one little glimpse of what we do as leadership for our community. We have experience. We have the ability to lead these projects in order to continue to shoot that gap, to ensure our lands, waters, and air are protected for the long term. When you think about everything that each of our leadership are a part of, or leading, or having conversations with the province and the feds, I see Nisga'a here in the room. We're partnered with Nisga'a, a part of the First Nations Climate Initiative. We're partnered so there's Metlakatla, Nisga'a, and Halfway River. We're part of the First Nations Climate Initiative, wanting to be a part of the solutions that ensure that our lands, waters, and air are taken care of, and essentially using projects to revitalize our lands, thus revitalize our cultural attachment to our lands. To make a positive contribution to reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, we're part of solutions by supporting the LNG industry or any energy industry that's happening in our territories. To ensure Indigenous views are taken into account when government is making decisions. Again, constantly being in front of every aspect of leadership, whether we're dealing with the province or the feds on every level, and making policies we went from a time where we were left on the sidelines, not having any activity or any participation or any say of how projects were developed in our territory, to where we have a seat at the table, and in particular owning projects and leading projects, to where policies are being implemented today that stifle that progress, that's stifling where our communities are at socially. First Nations are writing the roadmap to clean energy prosperity, a roadmap to owning our future. Fundamentally, reconciliation is impossible without strong economic foundation to advance change. For Indigenous communities, the outcomes of building Canadian LNG are tangible and essential. Jobs and Indigenous-owned businesses, own source revenues to fund clean drinking water, housing, and economic opportunities, and more. LNG is just one industry. First Nations deserve to be owners of their future across the economy. It's exciting to see First Nations leading the way in mining, hydroelectricity, hydrogen, forestry, and other sectors too. We are working to make Indigenous LNG an example to others.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.